Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you and to all our listeners.
Welcome. You tune into the Just Jennie show, and I'm your host, Jennie. Today we're diving into a topic that is both critical and deeply personal to so many in South Africa. The fight against gender-based violence. It's a fight led on many fronts, but today we're shining a spotlight on a powerful collective. The unsung heroes who provide a safe haven for survivors. We're speaking to Anisa Moosa, National Coordinator of the National Shelter Movement of South Africa. We're talking about the National Shelter Movement of South Africa, of NSMSA. What is the organization? What is their mission? And what is the vital role they play in creating a society where women and children can be free and safe from violence?
Okay.
Can you start by that?
Yes, sure, I can. So the National Shelter Movement was initiated in 2008 after National Summit, and the need for an umbrella body for shelters, gender-based violence shelters, was identified. And so the National Shelter Movement serves as that umbrella body for shelters, but also a united voice against gender-based violence and femicide. Our mission includes several activities, and some of those include advocacy and lobbying, legislation and policy review, research, capacity building and support to shelters. We create safe spaces. We have community engagement through our monthly webinars where we address relevant topics for gender-based violence on a prevention level. And then we also host, which is our highlight for this year is going to be the 5th annual National Shelter Indaba, which is a 3-day event for stakeholders in the gender-based violence space. So there's lots of things, but one of our most important services are the 24-hour shelter, GBV shelter helpline, where we place women all over South Africa in shelters should they call in and require services.
Okay. As an umbrella body for shelters across the country, what is the most significant benefit of having a unified voice for this sector?
So the one, like I mentioned, as part of our goals is the advocacy, our ability to lobby on relevant gender-based violence issues, to support shelters so that they don't work in silo. We can allow for information sharing, resource sharing, learning from best practices, and also it places us in a great position to make representation both regionally, provincially, and regionally, like in Africa and abroad. Like we will be attending the 5th World Conference on Women's Shelters in Sydney, Australia, now in September, and presenting on 3 abstracts as well. But also the fact that we have a 24-hour shelter helpline, it puts us in a great position to be able to place, because we've got affiliate shelters and member shelters with provincial reps that can assist and facilitate the placement process.
When in September, and where are you going to host this event?
Okay, so there's 2 separate events that I've mentioned, right? The one is the 5th World Conference that takes place in Sydney, Australia, from the 15th to the 18th of September, right? That's not our event. It's event. We will present on abstracts that we've submitted last year that were successful. 3 of our representatives will be presenting. Several of us will be attending the conference. We're hoping that we can put in a bid to host the 6th World Conference. The second event I'm referring to is our national. I know it's a bit confusing because coincidentally we're both at the 5th. So it's a 5th World Conference, but it's also our 5th annual National Shelter Indaba, which takes place in Johannesburg. The venue is yet to be confirmed. We do that in partnership with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, as well as the National Department of Social Development. That will be held from the 11th to the 13th of November this year. It's a 3-day event where we invite stakeholders in the gender-based violence space. We have workshops, we have plenary presentations to give us updates, to view gaps in the sector, to help us look at where we at in the fight against gender-based violence and where is it that we need to be going.
Okay, thank you for that. How does the NSMSA work with individual shelters to ensure they are meeting the need of the survivors?
So I think, again, referring to our goals, we play a big part in capacity building and giving support. So when we have training for our reps, that information is filtered down to the shelters in those provinces. But over and above that, Dr. Zubeida Dango is the director of both the NISA Institute for Women's Development and the National Shelter Movement, developed what we call a shelter leadership model or an action learning shelter model. So that is something that we've rolled out and piloted in several shelters, but that has really helped us to address their own gaps, their own weak growth areas, to improve on their policies, their programs, to improve their operations, their functioning, their governance. So that's really, really helped in terms of getting shelters to a place where they can provide effective services to survivors. Also, in terms of advocacy, we've used that platform and our robust media platform to promote the need for funding and resources to be able to provide adequate services, because at the moment, that's a gap. We really struggle with resources, adequate resources. The demand is great, the statistics are high, but the resources are very limited.
And we're going to touch now on the reality on the ground. What are some of the common challenges that women and children face when they first arrive at the shelter?
So when they first arrive at the shelter, often what happens is women are disorientated. Depending on the context and the circumstances under which they left their homes, you can imagine the trauma, the uprooting. It's very unsettling. We at the 24-hour helpline, we try to prepare survivors when they call in looking for placement. When we do the screening, when we go through the criteria for shelters, and we listen and we try to give them some kind of basic support. We try to prep them. But I think also the reality of actually reaching a place, it's a communal space. There are rules, there are limitations. And later on, I know that you're going to ask me about what safety precautions are in place. So to protect the interests of the survivors, like I said, there are restrictions. It's an adjustment. Schooling for children where moms come with their children. If they're going to the same school, it's going from a different place. So the challenges that they encounter are very emotional and psychological and even a logistical nature. So yeah, in terms of challenges, those are the biggest things. But also, I think the thought around now, what next? Because most shelters provide services for between 3 and 6 months, which means that at some point they need to already start thinking or preparing for after the shelter.
Yes, what happens after the shelter? That is a great question to each and everybody when you leave the shelter house. Can
Although I must say, I will unpack some of the services that shelters do provide. So, by the time they leave, we hope that most survivors are in a better space because we do provide psychosocial services depending on resources again. So, moms may need medical attention or healthcare services, legal advice. We do what we call women's economic empowerment opportunities we provide. So that's like skills development so that if they leave, how do they become self-reliant and independent? So we try to network with corporates and training providers to assist us with that. And some shelters even intervene with families. So they might
okay.
facilitate or intervene when it comes to reintegration and family mediation where possible.
What if somebody don't have a phone and something happened to them during the night? Are they allowed to come and knock on the shelter door? Will the shelter open the doors for them?
You mean if it's not an existing client, if the woman, someone from the
Yes,
street?
yes. If it's not the existing client, but a new client, I will say.
Okay, so I mentioned safety precautions, right? So a standard practice, even we as the NSM, we have a database of shelters that are affiliated to us, but we don't share those details to protect the privacy and the safety of women who have been placed there. Also, bearing in mind the risk factors around crime in the middle of the night, if someone phones in and just knocks at the door. Over and above that, remember that every shelter would have its own policies, its own security. Some of them
Okay,
have security guards outside, some of them don't, depending on their criteria, their policies, the case. Usually, we would encourage someone to go to the nearest police station and maybe get a protection order or to seek refuge, and then through a police officer, maybe accompanying them. So those are safety precautions that even
okay,
shelters need to take, especially if it's late at night.
okay. How do you ensure the safety and confidentiality of the women and children in your care?
Okay, so I did mention that a little bit. The details of shelters are not shared with the public. Even when we have people wanting to donate and sponsor things, we only share email addresses. They can get in touch with the shelter service directly and make arrangements to donate. Also, shelter, you spoke about a phone. So when a survivor is admitted into a shelter, they asked not to have their phone because sometimes perpetrators can access them through their location, through
Yes,
social media, that kind of thing. So the
yes,
highest, we try as far as possible to preserve the safety of survivors within our capacity. That sometimes is not so easy, especially when you work in communities. A location may be shared, but as far as possible from our side, we make sure that survivors are not exposed. Also, placement level, if there's a survivor who's the risk is great against the perpetrator, we may even need to place a survivor in an area that's not close by to where the perpetrator is. That also presents other challenges, like if she has children and they're school going, then does she leave the children behind? Does
yes.
she take them with? Do they change schools? So those are practical challenges that we have even in terms of placing.
Okay. We often hear about the lack of resources and funding for shelters. What is the impact of this on the services that you can provide?
Okay, so I think this is a nice following to the discussion that we had just now around the
Yes.
resources, right? So take give an example where, and you know, we talk about your vulnerable groups like people with disabilities, survivors with mental health issues, survivors with, let's say, for example, addiction issues. And remember, addiction can be sometimes the cause of domestic violence,
Yes.
but sometimes it's a coping for survivors, right? And so, whether shelters can cater for the specific, diverse, and complex needs of survivors, and that's why we talk about survivor-centered services. Do we, and are they holistic? Are they comprehensive? Do we have enough resources? Is there a nearby clinic that will attend to
Yes.
medical stuff? Does a
Advice.
shelter have a psychologist or a psychiatrist on their staff that can attend to the mental health needs? Does a shelter accommodate women who have addiction problems? So when I paint the picture now, if I say, let's say for example, a woman with two children, she has a mental health issue. We find that the nearest shelter is, let's say for example, in Pretoria, and she's from Joburg South. Does she leave her children behind? Are there family members to take care of them? Is the perpetrator abusive towards the children? So when we talk about resources and funding, first of all, there aren't enough shelters in South Africa to cater for the statistics that we have, right? That from an onset is a lack of adequate resources. So bed capacity is falling short a great deal. Over and above that, in Gauteng, the last 2 years have been particularly trying for shelters where funding, whether it be for compliance reasons, whether it be for application processes, have not been funded, which means that a lot of shelters have either closed down or suspended services or not taking new admissions. So it places a
Okay.
burden on others, right? Also, on an operational level, managers are struggling. So, what do I tell my staff? I don't have a salary to pay you. That also adds to gender based violence because when women are unemployed, they become financially dependent, right?
Yes.
So, there's a risk to jobs, there's the uncertainty. Managers can't make long term decisions about their operations because they don't know where they stand. So on the whole, I think I'm giving you a very clear sense of on the ground, the need is great, resources are not enough, shelters are struggling, there's no standardization of services. Even when you look at municipal requirements could be different in Sedibeng, it could be different in Ekurhuleni. Police stations also work differently. In fact, just last night we had a program on cases being withdrawn at police station level. We've been hearing, and just here in Joburg South, we've had cases where femicide is still also prevalent amongst police officers, whether they're abusive, whether they're the abusers or the perpetrators. So in terms of resources and how that affects us, we are unable then to provide adequate services. Survivors are not able to fully heal. And you know, earlier we spoke about this ideal picture where we would like to have them empowered, give them skills so that they become productive members of the community. Those, if we have a full package of comprehensive services and each shelter is able to provide those for shelters, then yes, the outcomes and the impact will be great. But with limited resources, I think that definitely stifles our ability to see to it that survivors and their children get a full package of services that will help them break that silence effectively.
How much involved is the government in uh, supplying the shelter houses and see the need of them for the funds?
Okay, so like I said, you know, it depends on the different provinces, right? It's a complex funding process, but obviously from Treasury, the allocations are sent to the provinces. So some provinces are having more difficulty than others, but you see that there is like some kind of a rippling effect. Just from the NSMSA side, if I look at our shelter placement service at the moment, in in Johannesburg, I would say we have about 3 functional shelters out of our
Sure.
list of about 22 in the province here. So, it's really scary. I know that government has been promoting the idea of us NGOs, not just shelters, but NGOs seeking alternate sources of funds, like accessing private sector and corporates and that kind of thing. Yes, it would be great if we were more independent from the government. But unfortunately, like I said, the need is great. We're dealing with a lot of vulnerability. We're dealing with a lot of people in need. The gender-based violence numbers are not going down enough. So it does place a huge strain on the sector as a whole.
Okay. This is quite a challenging job to run a shelter house. And you must
It's
also
very
have,
stressful.
yes, I can imagine, and you must have the passion also for people if you run something like that.
I think that's whenever we engage with stakeholders, and we've seen this over and over again, there's on the continuum of high levels of despondence, frustration, anger. You use the word passion, and sometimes passion can also mean anger in a lot of ways because you care a
Okay.
lot, right? And that's the problem with people working in the NGO sector. When I say problem, I mean that they care a lot. And so, they often go over and above, but the burnout levels are high, right? And I
I can
think, but
imagine.
on the other end of the continuum, there's still hope and there's still perseverance. And that is
Yes.
why we have activists and people that continue to fight the struggle,
Yes.
even though it looks bleak.
Okay. Beyond providing shelter, what are some of the key policy changes or legislative reforms the NSMSA is advocating for?
Okay, so the one I've already mentioned, which is your adequate, consistent funding for shelters, right? That's the one thing that we're advocating, and resources, but also standardization of services. So, like I said, there's lots of inconsistency you'll find in one province or in one area or in government facilities. There's certain services in NGOs there isn't. So the one thing is to try and get services to be standardized across the board and that everybody has equal resources, but we also need more of it so that we can be efficient, which I mentioned. The other thing I also mentioned was SAPS, which is our struggle with cases in femicide, and then also withdrawal of cases where women go, they re-traumatized when they go to police stations as a place of first contact. Um, and I mentioned very early in the program the emotional and psychological state of a survivor when she's
Yes, I
reaching out for help.
agree.
Sometimes she goes there and she doesn't get the assistance. Let's say it's at night, there's no one to take a call, or they don't have enough vehicles. That's another thing, that police don't have enough vehicles to transport survivors to shelters. We fortunately at the NSM, we have a good partnership with Uber. So in the 4 provinces that Uber functions,
Wow, that's
we
good.
are able to transfer a survivor from the nearest police station or wherever she's at to the shelter that we've placed her in. So that's the other thing in terms of our challenges with SAPS. But I think also, and this is not to say that, we do thank those police officers who put their lives out on the line to keep civilians safe, right? But I think some of the challenges is how gender-based violence is perceived. Is it a priority in terms of, is it viewed as a crime by law enforcement officers? And because I know that sometimes there's the opinion that it's a domestic issue and the couple must work out their problems. It's not a crime. So changing perceptions and also allowing them to get more training. regular training, updates on policies and laws so that they're updated with the processes and the protocols around their roles as police officers. The other thing that the NSM is currently, together with organizations like Call to Action,
Okay.
is on establishment of the efficient, I should say, the efficient establishment of the
Yes.
National Council for Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which is currently something that's being dragged out. And should we have such a governing body, it should in principle work well. We also
Okay.
struggle with the fact that in South Africa we have a lot of wonderful policies that need to be translated into action. Yeah, so those are some of the things, and obviously women's economic empowerment needs a lot of attention.
Okay. What is the NSMSA long-term vision for South Africa where a shelter are no longer needed?
Vision of the NSMSA is for women and their children to be safe and free from gender-based violence. So that's what we work towards, and that's what all our goals and our mission is directed towards: a society free of gender-based violence and communities that are safe for women and children.
Okay. Shelters are a crucial first step, but what happens after the woman and the children leave? What services are in place to help them to rebuild their lives? You already mentioned that. You already touched on that
Yes,
for us.
I really touched on it. So, to answer that question, just for the interest of being thorough, the one is also reunification, which I spoke about, so reintegration into the community. And remember that healing and recovery is long term. It's not just about going through a shelter process and then coming out and everything's. A survivor often has to spend many years, sometimes doing a lot of self growth. It's a journey. All of us actually, where there's trauma. It takes a long while, but I think having adequate support structures, so most shelter services don't work in isolation. Most shelter services are part of an organization, or what we call a VEP organization, a victim empowerment program. So they would do day services like, let's say, for example, out
Yes.
client counseling, life skills programs, training. I spoke about women's economic empowerment, so skills development so that she can acquire um, employment. At the moment, the NSM is collaborating with SPA, for example, SPA Group, to get a program running for training on merchandising and basic
Okay.
skills,
Basic
right?
skills.
So yeah, so that's an example of the kind of things that we do. Other shelters have provided women with, let's say, for example, feeding classes or cosmetics, like let's say spa treatments or hairdressing or sewing, even
That's good.
computer skills, right? Yes. And then, yeah, so it's reintegrating them essentially back into communities so that they become more independent and empowered.
The NSMSA has a national toll-free helpline. Can you tell our listeners how that works and what kind of support people can expect when they call?
Okay, so I think that the program is flowing very nicely with some of the questions are going into one another. Yes, I have mentioned the 24-hour shelter helpline several times. So when a woman calls in, she will be received by one of our staff members who would get her details. So first, I think it's more about listening to where she's at, what is her need. We would also look at a basic risk assessment. So whether it's someone who's living with an abusive partner or it's someone who's fleeing from having been sexually assaulted. And then if it's an emergency, obviously, then we need to look at emergency placement. Once we establish the need, we would do, sometimes what happens is you'd get a survivor or a victim phoning in. She's in the middle of a volatile situation at home, But it is possible that a day or two later, she decides, no, she doesn't want to leave, right? So once we establish that she's ready to leave, we would contact shelters in the area, depending on which province she's calling from. We do a screening to see if she meets the criteria of the specific shelter. Once we know that there's place in a specific shelter, we've spoken to the social worker there, we submit a referral letter to the shelter. And then if the client needs transport in one of the 4 provinces that Uber operates, then we will book an Uber for the client and we will send the client
Thank you
through.
so much. Do you have any message for our sisters and women in Women's Month?
Yes. This morning we were in a webinar for religious leaders, and we said, thank God for women, right? So women are leaders, influencers, they are nurturers. They're one of the most important parts of our society. And it's sad that they're not being given the dignity and the respect that they deserve.
Yes.
Women's Month may be coming to a close. The 16 days is coming up, but remember that gender-based violence is all of our problem. And it's all our responsibility, 365
Okay.
days,
Thank
to
you.
try and make sure that we
Thank-
get it right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work you are doing for our citizens. And thank you for joining me on the Just Jennie show. Today, we're just going to have 1 minute of silence for the woman on the street and the woman in prison. Contact us, our listeners, on 068 102 4094. That's our WhatsApp number, Inspire Elsies Radio. See our content on Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Have a blessed day. Goodbye.